Revival House Network.
So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, namely unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. We face our common difficulties. They concern, thank God, only material things.
But they're in Lipscomb!
Hey everybody, long time no here. This is Deep End Podcast. It's been a long time since I've done one of these, and I think last time you guys heard this and heard one of these episodes, I was going on about wanting to do them more regularly. Of course, with the regular commentaries and other podcasts, the schedules those run on, it's been just really hard to find a consistency with this one. But it is January and represents a new year, and thus is another reason why I wanted to jumpstart this again. It is a new year, and with the new year, it brings a lot of things. It brings change. Everybody does the whole new year, new me thing. I think with change comes, prospects of self-growth, prospects of all sorts of progress. And I think part of that progress too is it's not just the little things, personal health, it's fitness. It's not just your career. Sometimes it's the thing that's holding all that stuff back. Sometimes it's relationships, sometimes it's people, sometimes it's forgiving people. All that stuff is crucial to better you, right? New year, new me, that whole deal. Anyway, on this episode, I've got my good friend, Mr. Josh James. He's from the R-Rated Horror Commentary. And if you guys listen to the normal BTM commentaries or anything else in the Revival House Network, you guys are, no stranger with Josh. So how you doing, man?
Hey, what's up, man? Thanks for having me back. This is my second trip down this podcast highway with you.
Well, it's cool.
We did another show about, I'm trying to remember what it was. Was it about like ambition or careers or something like that, right?
Something like that, and it might have went off into a political angle with all the school shootings and stuff that were going on last year. 2018 was a crazy year.
Yeah, dude, I'm pretty glad to have that year behind me. It was all right, it had some high points, but it had a lot of low points too, And it was just weird, a lot of weird climate in this country and stuff, and I'm kind of glad to see it in the rear view. I'm hoping for the best. I'm optimistic for 2019 to maybe see some positive changes and not more of the same,
Well, what's interesting is year after year, once January 1st rolls around, if you guys are on social media, which you probably are, you see the same stuff, right? You see a bunch of meme work and posts about, 2018 or whatever the year that just ended was, left me like this, or some kind of inspirational wannabe quote of, oh my God, 2018 left me battered, bruised, and raped, but you know what? I'm still alive. The thing is, it's going to be the same. 2019 is going to be the same. 2020 will be the same. You're always going to have troubles. There's always going to be really shitty things that happen throughout the year. There's always going to be people that pass away. There's always going to be celebrities that die, right? Was it 2017 where everybody was making a big deal about people like Carrie Fisher passing away?
Yeah.
And it was a huge deal. And everybody's like, not another one, 2017. Fuck you. I'm like, dude, people are going to continue to die and pass away. So I think with that, it's like an epidemic of people that just focus on the bad, obviously.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the social media just brings a lot of that out to the forefront. And, it comes across our screens a lot. So it's just something else to talk about. It's something else to make drama out of. And it's like, yeah, 2017 had a lot of celebrities die. And people were like, fuck 2017, constantly saying that. It's just kind of rolling my eyes like people die. It's just natural part of life. Now, when somebody passes away untimely, maybe somebody in your personal life, and that's tragedy, that's when somebody takes their own life or suddenly dies in a car accident. I mean, that's a whole different ball of wax. But as we're in the world as a whole, humans have their time on Earth and then they pass away. And so these celebrities who we don't even know, people we're not even connected to, people make a big deal about it. It's kind of annoying after a while.
Mhm.
It's like we all know, that it's sad that Carrie Fisher died, and that was kind of a bigger thing because she was such a huge icon to our generation. But people harp on it. They harp on it, and they generate a lot of drama around it. I think for attention, and we kind of need to steer away from that. As the world gets busier, as it gets more complex, there's more moving parts. It's just a lot of white noise, and the political part of the equation is really a tough pill for me to swallow, because it's just such it's a nonstop stream of negativity. It seems like, it's in vogue to trash the current administration and everything. And I get that people need a place to vent.
You hit on a key word, negativity.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the only resolution that should be is to stop negativity.
Mm-hmm.
Go into a new year with an outlook of expectation. Like, I know things aren't going to go my way this entire year, right? They're probably not going to go my way more often than they do go my way. And I should just accept that and focus on the things that are going right. And I don't think there's enough people that do that. We live in a very first world mentality, type of all the time. And
oh God, we are so spoiled in this country. It's ridiculous.
We complain about things we shouldn't complain about,
mm-hmm.
right? And that's why I get it. Easier said than done. I wish everybody could travel. I wish everybody could get an experience like that and travel to places that are less fortunate, or that just sort of operate on less,
mm-hmm.
or just operate on different things that we find to be super valuable, right? And you might get a little bit of clarity, because sometimes there's people in our nation and other first world countries that have their heads so far up their asses that it makes me sick. And I'm not saying I'm not guilty myself of letting there be times where I get absorbed in busy life, adulthood. You get bogged down. The important things sort of fall on the back burner, not intentionally. It just sort of indirectly happens because we all got jobs. We've all got lives. Money tends to stress us out, even though we like to read memes that say money ain't everything and it doesn't buy you happiness. We all know that
mm-hmm.
it's the key stressor in our lives sometimes.
Mm-hmm. But I think that has a lot specifically to do with the fact that we have a huge abundance of everything in this country, and we're sold a fantasy, if you will, that we're supposed to have this amount of shit, live in this kind of house, drive this kind of car, have this sort of spouse, and live a certain lifestyle that I really think, has been inflated through like social media lately and stuff. And when I don't really make a lot of money, to be honest. I'm struggling artist and stuff, and so sometimes I get mired down in that whole ideology of like living the American dream and owning a bunch of shit and, being affluent with my my income and stuff. But then, I have an epiphany and I'm just like, I have a great fucking life. I have my health. I have a roof over my head. I have all kinds of plenty of shit here to entertain myself. I have a job. I have friends. I really have so much more in my little microcosm, my bubble, if you will, than a lot of people in other countries that are really suffering, going through hardships I don't even have the chance to have. So it's really stupid that we complain about these things, because the average American life, the middle class or even the lower middle class American has a lot to be grateful for. That's why so many people want to get over here, to be able to access that. So.
And this is actually a really good segue to the meat of the podcast, what I really wanted to talk about. So talking about New Year's and your resolutions, whatever, if that means something to you and that helps motivate you to accomplish something, we'll call it a resolution. Just wipe out negativity,
mm-hmm.
accept that negativity doesn't have to cancel out positivity. Count your blessings. There's always going to be checks and balances all over the place. You're going to have bad days. But that's not what you should be aiming at as far as what's improving. So anyway, like I said, imagine the shoe on the other foot. Think about the world as a whole, and it might take you a lot farther. Now, on the topic of the country we live in, I think the ultimate resolution, less negativity, and just ultimately being grateful for what we have. Josh, you just kind of hit it on the head. You know, you could have more, right? We could all have more.
Mm-hmm. And it's good to aspire to take part in that. The fact that we have the opportunity to make more of ourselves and to improve and to reach out into the world and grab what's there as an opportunity, but to obsess over it or to constantly feel bad that we don't feel like we have enough, you know, generates those negative feelings, those feelings of low self-worth, and constantly comparing ourselves to each other, you know.
Yeah. I'll add it onto the list of resolutions for you. Let's stay off social media just a little bit more. I know it's kind of an unrealistic thing to say.
Yeah.
I mean, I have social media too for certain things.
Oh, dude. Well, real quick. I mean, I have 3 Twitter accounts. It's ridiculous. I have my personal, my art business, and I have the podcasts. And I think, you know, I have 3 Facebook pages for the same reasons. It's just like, I'm constantly trying to manage these things to, I think, you know, improve the livelihood of my daily life and find commissions from people and promote the podcast to get people interested in that. And then I just want to be a regular dude on social media and interact with friends that maybe necessarily don't care about things I'm trying to promote or projects I'm working on. So,
well, to a degree, like I said, it's unrealistic to say, hey, ditch social media. That's the world we live in now, especially if you have a business. It's hard you need it, right?
Yeah, dude, we're intertwined. It's too late. It's got its hooks in it.
To be competitive, right? You got to. But
yeah,
for the sake of all of our health and to not fall victim of the Instagram generation of having to compete with all this fake, whatever you want to call it, this fake expectation of life, you know, because that's what it is. You know, a lot of the young people, they feel like they have to show off to people they don't even know, right? It's all about, hey, I know people, you know, especially in my part of the country where I'm at, you know, there's certain parts of town where it's really cool to be that type of person to take pictures with maybe really, really fancy cars that maybe you really don't own. It's just somebody's car and they let you take a picture in front of it.
Right,
you know,
right.
Like it is your car. There's a lot of that. You got to showboat and there's just no reason for it.
Well, I think we know. I mean, the reason why people do things like that and they create this facade is because the accumulation of wealth is essentially power. And that's the sort of structure that we live with. And so, you know, people want to build an image of themselves of having power by having things, by being at certain events or being around certain types of people and showing off, essentially. It's a big show and tell, right? So people try to foster that even if they don't really have it. They put a lot of their self-worth into what they have, the things, you know, the tangible. And, you know, and I think it has a backlash. I mean, I think it's good to want to take part in the, you know, this capitalist structure of the United States that we live in, which is, you know, you can do anything with your life. You could start with nothing and have everything, you know, it's an awesome thing. But I think people like to embellish because it makes themselves feel better. And then I think the average type of person kind of wants to get down on themselves and be negative because they can't really compete with that, you know? And it's a fool's errand, you know? I mean, everything that we have should be something, you know, in terms of like a thing, a possession or monetary wealth. It's just stuff at the end, you know? I mean, there's so many people out there who have all kinds of shit and are miserable.
Exactly. I'm not going to pretend that I haven't, you know, done any of that, but I am proud to say if you go on my Instagram, you will see me flaunting my material objects, which are Ninja Turtle statues or something stupid.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not taking pictures of my car. I'm not taking pictures of my house and putting them up on Instagram. I'm trying to stay away from that stuff. Basically, there's nothing on my Instagram that I think is going to get anybody laid, right? Or it's not going to get anybody any power or whatever. It just says, hey, look, I'm kind of a dork because I like that, or here's a movie collection I have, or, you know, whatever. It is. It's not too much of me. It's stuff that's about me, but whatever. I don't take it too seriously.
Well, it's stuff that, you know, just like makes you happy. It's things that you're interested in. It's not really a flaunting of, you know, you're not sending a message that you're some sort of alpha dog because you have like the latest fucking.
Well,
nicest car or something,
That's funny, man. If you have to tell people you're an alpha dog, you're not a fucking alpha dog.
Exactly. It's so true, man.
You really don't. You really don't.
It's just like same thing. If you go around telling people you're a genius, you're probably not a genius. It's got to be self-evident, really, at the end of the day.
Do you think the guy with a big pant load showing the whole world has to tell everybody he has a big dick? No, man. Proof's in the pudding, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's got it. But you kind of hit on it. I want to segue into the main topic.
Yeah.
We live in a country where we can literally change our situation, right? We're blessed to live in this nation that, I mean, today it's hip to complain about it. We can complain about everything that's going on politically, blah, 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 blah. Oh, I'm moving to Canada, or I'm going to move here if this happens, or I don't get my way. That's not democracy. And that's whining, right? It doesn't matter who's in office. You're going to have somebody else in office in 48 years, and we're going to have more balance. It's going to shift again, and it'll always kind of be back and forth. And this country is still going to be amazing, right? It's ridiculous. It's still going to be great. So on that note, the very first episode I did of this podcast, Josh, I don't know if you listened to it. It was the one where it was just sort of an introduction of myself. And I talked a little bit about my childhood and my dad and my upbringing. Not what makes me me, but some of what contributed to who I am, I think.
I thought that was amazing podcast. It was pretty powerful stuff, man. It was, I'd never heard you and Zach talk in that way before.
Yeah.
And it, it moved me. I thought it was really, really good. So, definitely go back and listen to that if you haven't yet. But
especially if you guys are a fan of the BTM stuff or the stuff that Zach is on, because I made the ultimate troll weep. And he actually shut down and got serious for an hour or two. So it was pretty neat. But anyway, so I came from a place that, to me at a time, felt pretty hopeless, right? I was young. I didn't have anything going on. It was at times desperate. It was at times very, very depressing. And it just painted a very inaccurate picture of what a family should be, of what an upbringing should be. And I just didn't know. I'm a kid. I'm very young. I don't really know what's normal. I watch TV, right? You see Full House. I'm like, is that what a family's supposed to be? Or is my family how a family's supposed to be? Is Full House the way it should be, or is Roseanne the way it should be? But anyway, on that podcast, I talked a lot about my father, and I don't remember how much in detail I got about all that stuff. I know I talked about all the negative stuff that went on, but ultimately I think I did touch on the fact that we got to move on. And that's part of the whole New Year's resolution with everything. You got to move on. If there's anything holding you back, whatever your progress is you want to make in life, sometimes if events in your life are holding back your personal growth, you got to let it go and you got to forgive. So I think on that first one, I did mention that I've long since forgiven my dad who's passed away. He passed away in 2011. He passed away of cancer. And I forgave him before that. I remember being 20 years old and thinking hard on it. I'm like, you know what? I am pretty sure my dad has his reasons, right? He did a lot of horrible things. He was the worst example while also being the best example, if that makes sense, right? Because I live my life now based on his mistakes. I'm like, well, what would my dad do in this situation? Oh, okay, I'll do the opposite. Or luckily, my dad would do certain things, and I retained how I felt when he would do those things, and they stick with me. It's like, well, I would never, for example, cheat on somebody because I remember what that was like on my mom. That sucked. So it's good that I remember those things. So lessons are always very valuable if you don't forget them.
Well, I think it's interesting that you bring that up too, because there's two types of people. There's the type of people who grew up in a broken home with a bad parent or bad parents both or whatever, and they just become that person. And then there's the other type of person who observes that type of behavior and goes, that's exactly what I'm not supposed to do. And, you use that as a guideline through your life to be a better person, even though you have some of those traits inherently inside you. You try to use those negative experiences from family problems or whatever you observe growing up and apply them as a sort of like I don't know, like a guide to how to do better, how not to treat people. Like if I ever have kids someday, I'm not going to do this, you know?
Well, I can count my blessings that I was mature enough to notice those things and to be able to have a little bit of foresight on where a certain path could take me. Right. And there's situations like that, upbringings like that could take people in one of two ways. You could continue on, like your father's past or whoever it is that's setting that example. You could literally repeat history, pick up those bad habits, even if you still resent where that stuff came from. It's funny how people still copy those acts, right? Yeah, even though they
compulsory or something. It's embedded in their psyche somehow, and it just comes out, you know.
Or you can acknowledge it, and you could, like we were just talking about, break the cycle more or less. Anyway, so, and believe me, I had that moment myself, and I'm blessed to have said that. I'm blessed that it happened so early. I think I was like 16 and I saw the writing on the wall. You know, I had my anger issues, you know, and I realized in my case, I was just treating my little siblings the exact way my father was treating me at the time. You know, you don't even notice it. It's like, God, I was so blind to it. I'm so focused on how much I'm a punching bag, and I'm just turning around and I'm bullying and taking out aggressions and losing my temper over little things on other people that are once again smaller than myself. And, you know, I had a big moment. I had a big outburst one day where I just totally lost myself in a white rage. And luckily I got a cold stare in the mirror and I nipped it in the bud and I changed it, right? I changed it, and it's doable. So, you know, I might have talked about this in the first episode, but I'll reiterate, anybody that's in a relationship right now, and I'm not trying to be fucking Dr. Phil here. I'm not a doctor. I'm just talking from a guy from experience. But on the same note, I don't think Dr. Phil has personal hands-on experience with this stuff. I just think he talks about it a lot. You know what I mean? So just take it for what it is. I'm just a person who has some experience. But if you're in a relationship, let's say you're a girl. I mean, it could go either way though, but traditionally, let's say you're a girl and you're with a guy who you love, and it could be great 95% of the time. But there's that other 5% area where a bad temper rears its head, you know, and that person becomes another person and he kind of breaks. I don't know if that's come on from alcohol or from just a natural bad temper, or there's some bipolar, I don't know what. But regardless, he does something that's not in his typical character. Maybe he hits you, right? Maybe he hits your child. Maybe he breaks stuff. Maybe he throws somebody down the stairs. And once he sort of purges all that energy out of him after he's done something like that, well, then all of a sudden clarity strikes him. Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, and once again, it's the last time it'll ever happen, right? And there's a lot of empty apologies of, oh, I'm so sorry. You know where I get that. You know, it's my dad. I'm so sorry. It'll never happen again. I love you, blah, blah, blah. My thing is, I get it. I mean, the obstacle is going to be varying in difficulty from person to person, but I feel like I'm proof of it, that if you're smart enough to acknowledge where stuff is coming from or where it derives from, you're smart enough to do something about it, right? You're smart enough to break the cycle and just to not fucking do it. Otherwise, it's a crutch. It's an excuse. So anyway, now, and like I said, I acknowledge that's how I got to my peace with it. And I forgave my dad, even though he never said he was sorry for anything. And there was a point in my life where I did want that secretly. It's like, you know, I kind of want some resolution here. I wish he would just say he was sorry. I wish he would just say,
dude, I know that feeling so well. I really do.
It's like, look, secretly and quietly in my head, I know you fucked up. And I think my dad has to know he fucked up. Like, will we just please talk about it? I just want to hear you say, look, I'm sorry. And you know what? As an added bonus, I could take it or leave it. But if you would just throw in one, I love you too. Because I never, or I'm proud of you. Yeah. Right. That stuff is important to kids. Right. Now I've done okay without it. I would have liked to have had that, but there came a point when I was like 19 or 20 that I accepted my dad for what he was. He was a very stern guy. He had no emotion. It wasn't in his style. He didn't smile, let alone vocalize what he was feeling, right? So I understood that was probably a really tall order to ask or expect of him. But you know what? Later in his life, because I'm a lot older than my youngest siblings, there's 10 of us in our clan. So, and I'm at the top. And I kind of saw how he was treating the younger batch of kids. And that was good enough for me. I saw it. I saw him in his actions with them. It never really cascaded to me at all. Like my time was done with him, basically, right? It never got resolved. But I saw how he was acting with the younger kids. And you know what? Through those actions, I could kind of see, you know what? That's a guy that has to be sorry, right? He has to be sorry because he's doing things a little bit different. Mm. And I took that for what it was. And I'm like, you know what? That's good enough for me. I forgive him because I assume that the reason why he was the way he was, it has to do with something that I know nothing about. There's a reason. There's usually a reason for everything.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm not going to say that it excuses it, because I do believe everybody has to take responsibility and ownership for their actions, regardless of where you think it maybe stems from. But at least I could have an understanding of the guy. Mm-hmm. It's like, and that pretty much was drawn at, I don't know what it is, but I have to assume it was something and there's a reason for it. And I got to be over it. I got to forgive you. You know what? Deep down, I'm going to love you. I'm going to assume you love me. And that's just going to be the best it's going to be. So I always assumed that there was something. So, and before I get too much into me, the reason why I wanted Josh James on this podcast is because, we kind of share a little bit of this. You obviously had a little bit of an upbringing with your father. I don't know much about it at all, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think you and I kind of began this, have a realization. We've been friends for a couple years now, and begin to realize a little bit here, a little bit there, that we both had shitty dads and not maybe the best, family life growing up. My parents got divorced when I was really young. I was 3 or 4. One of my earliest memories was, my father being blind drunk, screaming, my parents fighting, me and my sister hiding underneath the table, terrified. And shortly after that, the divorce coming and then the custody battles. And, when you're a kid, you just assume that everything happening around you is just kind of the way it is. It's normal because you don't have any frame of reference to compare anything to.
Until you get a little older and you go on sleepovers and you see other people's families.
Oh, absolutely.
What?
That's for me, especially when I started dating certain, when I got older, started dating and seeing these girls with their families and how, maybe not perfect, but how they just functioned completely different. Oh, they were functioning, not dysfunctional, essentially. Because I spent the majority of my childhood being raised with my sister by my mother, a single mother. So... yeah, I mean, I think we began to realize we had some things in common, and just in terms of having, issues with our dads and growing up with an asshole, essentially, for father. My dad's main thing was just that he was, a selfish, narcissistic alcoholic who was mainly verbally abusive, but could be physically abusive if pushed to the point. I remember in his second marriage, my dad's been married 4 times, by the way. In his second marriage, I remember when I was a kid being over at his house for visitation, on a weekend, and having a strange woman come over and pick up me and my sister and my half-sister and taking us out for ice cream. Well, that whole thing came together because my father had gotten drunk and pushed my stepmom down the stairs when she was pregnant with my brother,
CPS?
That never happened. Well, no, it was my stepmom's friend that she called that lived down the street that came and got us. So, it was just but to me, I seem to have more of a lackadaisical attitude about it. I was really able to roll with it. It had a really bad effect on my sister, who really struggles in her adult life dealing with a lot of the events from our childhood and stuff. But, he was an abusive douchebag who, it was really just a man with a broken ego for whatever reason, who used alcohol as a crutch. And, he was able to show love in his own way. I mean, in the earlier days, I think he really felt a lot of guilt So there was a lot of showering with, things. And, he was able to say, I love you and stuff like that, but he was never able to really own up to any of his mistakes. He still doesn't. I mean, he's never said, I'm sorry for anything. He's one of those people who externalizes his own internal issues by blaming other people or blaming situations, just very cowardly in that way. And, much like you, as I got older and I went out to the world, I just sort of became my own entity and I distanced myself from that. But every now and then I would try to go back and spend some time with him and see where he was in his life. And it was always the same bullshit. I mean, even if he was sober at that time, he was still a fucking asshole, maybe not as ruthless as what you make your dad sound like, because it almost sounds like your dad was somewhat malicious sometimes. My father was more, I think it was almost like
self-destructive,
involuntary response, just sort of like his weakness and his faulty ego always caused him to have these like incidents with people around him, so, as I got older and we got together, I just realized, man, this dude is just toxic. I don't need it in my life. My life is hard enough as it is. And I mean, every time we get together, it would just be some new thing, some new problem. And, I realized that I was never going to get the father that I wanted. I never was going to get the relationship that I wanted as an equal or just as somebody to look up to, who's never like any kind of role model or anything. I was only going to get things taken away, because there's always that little tiny thing in your psyche that says, how much of myself am I like is like him, So you're always like comparing yourself. I mean, it's such a natural thing for a man, for a boy, to compare themselves to their father and, want to look to their father as a role model. Well, that, went out the window. But I was like, well, can I have some kind of man-to-man relationship with this person? And I just realized, it's just not worth it to me. And I'll never get the apologies for the bullshit he pulled because he won't even acknowledge it as something that that was ever his fault, So I definitely can relate to that feeling that you have of like, it's never going to be, I'm never going to get the closure in this relationship and it's never going to improve. And you just have to walk past it and find your sort of own destiny,
Well, I like to think that if my dad was still alive today, that maybe we would have gotten to that point. I always want to think the older he was getting, the closer and closer we were approaching to, that sort of relationship. I don't know if it would have ever happened, but I don't want to think of my father. I don't want to associate the word malice, right? I don't, because even though the things he was doing was really hurtful, in all sense of the word, I still think it was driven by
personal flaw
stuff.
Like a personality flaw.
It was driven by personal stuff. There was some kind of personal damage within him. He was very self-destructive. He was self-destructive to the point where other people got hurt in the process, right? So if he hurt somebody in my family, like my mom, it was usually having to do with drugs, right? There was something else. It wasn't like he woke up that day and he was thinking, you know what? I fucking hate these people. I'm going to fucking beat the shit. No, it was always something else pulling the strings. You know what I mean? Now, and like I said, I really implore everybody, if you're listening to this commentary and you haven't listened to the first episode too, because I don't want to go and retread everything, but it's sort of a companion piece to that one. But like I said, I always just gave my dad the benefit of the doubt that, you know what, as I got older, I began to figure things out a little bit more for myself. When you're a kid, your parents they're deities. They hung the moon. They're superheroes now or supervillains. Now they're not. And as I got a little older and I started thinking for myself on it more, my goal was to humanize my dad. I just wanted to humanize him and come to some level of understanding. Maybe not why, what are the particular reasons he's like this, but just understanding that, he's human. There's something there. Anyway, this is what I really want to talk about. And this is super hard to talk about. And this is part of the reason why we haven't had this episode. I've been talking about doing an episode like this for months, and it's just really hard to discuss.
Oh, yeah.
And it's super sensitive, this next part. And it's always worrisome because there's many, many angles to this story of what I'm about to talk about here. There's definitely a second part to it. And at this time, I can't really talk about the second part. Because it's tricky when it involves other people.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm going to say what I feel is important, and it involves my father, who's passed on. And it's obviously it's not involving anybody that's direct. You know what I mean? It's just really scary territory. And it's just, I was,
makes people very uncomfortable, you know?
I was struggling with it. I was like, man, there is a story here that I think can honor someone like my dad, right? Because it could help people and help me and help maybe even those people that did know him understand him and why the way he was. Now, I'm not saying he would be looking for that understanding. But I don't know. I like the idea of my dad humanized. The stuff I can tell you and that I will tell you, it makes me understand him a little bit more, and it makes me see him as a person. And I'm like, oh, well, see, that's what I always hoped was there. That's what I always assumed was there. And now it makes me level with you a little bit, right? And it helps me not be so upset about it. So it's a good thing. But like I said, there's definitely things that can be elaborated on, and it goes in other places. But then we start getting into darker territory. You know, it's not as friendly, and it's just like I said, it involves people, and there's no way I could even mask it, right? There's no way I could even mask like, okay, well, this is Jane Doe. If you listen to the story, you could pretty much put two and two together who the people are I'd be talking about. So I'll just save that for another time and see if there's any way I can talk about it. But anyway, for this one, so here we go. Maybe a year ago. I don't know. We'll just call it a year ago. I visited my family, right? I live in Arizona, everybody. And I traveled to the Midwest to visit my family. And I was having a talk with my mother. And I'll put it out there. I love my mother to death, right? I love my mother to death. Even though neither one of them were perfect. A lot of the behavior on both sides of it was very enabling, but at the end of the day, as an adult, I see that my mom was just a victim of manipulation. You know, I could ask all day long, well, why did you let this happen? Why did you let that happen? I understand as an adult that it's not that easy, because I've known many people who fall victim of manipulation, and how fragile our minds can be. So I don't hold that stuff against her. I think she always loved us. But anyway, so I was having a late night chat with my mom, like we do whenever I do go into town. And she confided something in me. She confided in something into me that, I don't know, it was kind of a revelation, but at the same time, it was like, oh, okay. And it was something that I always in the back of my mind was, suspect over. But she said, now my dad didn't talk to her either. You'd think that, okay, well, he at least confided in his wife. No, I could easily say that, everybody's situation is different. Josh, your parents got divorced at a young age, and I know that could be horrible for some families. On the flip side, I think my family would have benefited from them getting divorced, because they just had the toxic to end all toxic relationships.
Sure.
And that's where a lot of bitterness came. I think my dad felt chained down with all this responsibility, and yet he kept contributing to it. He kept having more kids and kept fucking up more and more and more. It was seriously self-destructive. I'm like, you're creating more and more the thing you're mad at, And so I think a lot of resentment was born out of that. But anyway, no, but he didn't talk to her either. I always said he was born in 1986 with me, because he was a phantom before that. I never knew about my dad. And it always creeped me out. I'm like, why don't I know about you? Why do I have no stories to pass on? I don't know what his life was like. I knew nothing. And which that was always trigger number one. Like, okay, well, there's obviously some shit there, and there's a reason why. Okay. So we had this talk, and my mom said, very much not in the fashion of my dad, that before he passed away, at some point before he passed away, he did buckle down and have a talk with her. He confided in her. And I think the way she describes it is that it did get a little emotional. There may or may not have been a little booze involved on my dad's part, but regardless of how it got out. He confided in my mom, and he told her that he was molested a lot. And so when she tells me that stuff, like, oh, okay, now it all makes sense. Everything makes sense now.
Yeah.
And I felt horrible for him. So, and even talking about this stuff is very tricky because it runs the risk of doxing certain people. But I have to talk about this part because I think this is very beneficial to someone like my dad. So, whatever. But he grew up, he didn't have an easy childhood, I guess. So, my grandmother, his mother, we didn't have the greatest relationship with her. She was rather abusive back in the day, too. And she was very manipulative. And you could and we always figured that, too, because I lived with her for a time. And I'm like, you know what? If my dad was raised by this woman, I can kind of see the workings here because she was not all there. But I guess when he was a little kid, she was still sowing wild oats or something. She was, I guess, a bit loose, right? My dad, I think, was the product of probably a one-night stand. He didn't know his dad. He was ultimately adopted later on by someone else. My last name that you see on this title card, that's not my blood last name. If you really want, I guess my blood last name would be York, technically. But anyway, so when he was really little, while she was working and probably paying the rent and stuff, when she wasn't doing those things, she was constantly at the bars and at hotel rooms with guys. And she was never at home with my dad. And so he would be left alone with his uncle. Now, his uncle lived with them too. He was involved in an accident when he was young. When he was a child, he got into a bike wreck and he hit his head really hard. And apparently it did something. It knocked something loose and he had permanent brain damage. And he had this condition where he was almost like stunted. He was almost kind of a child. And he pretty much always needed to be taken care of. He would never, ever be independent. He'd always have to be passed on to somebody. Somebody would have to take care of him. And to this day, he lives with her. And he's probably 60 years old. Anyway, she used to go out and do her thing and leave him home alone as like a 3-year-old or whatever with him. And he said that this person would molest him on often enough. I don't really know the number, right? But that makes total sense to me. You add that on to the fact that my mom also told me that one Christmas morning, he woke up and saw his mother, my grandmother, after a suicide attempt in front of the Christmas tree. I mean, is that not some Silent Night, Deadly Night shit?
That's pretty hardcore, man. That I can understand why that would cause some problems, some need for therapy,
some scarring, that's some Silent Night, Deadly Night shit.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, when you factor in things like that, especially sexual abuse, man, everything falls into place. It explains why my dad was so silent all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He had no emotion.
He sounds like he maybe had a real issue with anger,
He had an issue with anger, definitely. It makes sense why he had to have those vices from a young age, and he acted out, alcohol and drugs from a teen. And I'm just, like I said, playing Dr. Phil here. I don't know, but I have to imagine that it's one thing to say, okay, look, if you could just sort of, like I said, imagine that you're in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And from a young age, we're talking 3, 4, and 5 years old, that stuff is happening to you. How that's got to fuck up your development, along the way, right?
And of course, back in those days, there was no real easy outlet to any kind of therapy or psychiatry or whatever you might need. I just, something to help you to digest those crazy, internally, instinctually that they're fucked up and wrong from an early age, but there's no real outlet to talk about it with anybody. So you're just left to internalize those terrible things and find a way to deal with it, right? And I'm sure they make you angry because it's this constant phantom in your childhood that plagues you,
I could only imagine it was plaguing him, and I could only imagine that he got used to from a young age, especially like when puberty hit and you're really starting to, that he got pretty accustomed to just shoving that stuff down, and it probably waged a war in his mind, and he shut down in a certain way. He didn't show emotion. It makes sense why he constantly played the tough guy, like the scary guy. He was this dude where he always had this stone cold look on his face where you didn't know if he was a chef or if he was a contract killer. Like, right. What story is your face telling? I have no idea. You know how they always say, I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, like, killers are quiet or things like that. I don't know. He had that look about him, that aura about him. Like, dude, I think this guy's going to kill me in his sleep. It's not like he says anything rude to me. He doesn't do anything. He just has this demeanor about him, and he's super cold, and I don't know what it is. But I get it. I mean, he got so used to bottling that stuff up and acting a certain way. And you know what? I hate to say it, but can you imagine? I'm trying to think like them. I'm trying to put myself in that situation. Can you imagine what that's got to do to your head, a little boy's head, when you're trying to go through puberty and you had shit like this happen before you had your natural time to sort of like discover sexuality? And
well, you have a really important developmental period when you're coming of age, especially I think as a boy. I mean, girls experience things that may be a little bit different when they hit that puberty, and you're forming, your body's changing, but you're forming a new identity. Your whole body's going crazy. Your mental capacity is changing. The chemicals in your brain are changing and all that. And you're forming new behaviors, And so if you're trying to internalize all these like really horrible things that have happened or things that you've witnessed, and you're not getting any help through those sort of things, then yeah, I mean, I can understand when you're saying your dad had a very cold exterior, because I get accused of that myself personally a lot by people, and it probably was like a sort of self-defense. You know what I mean?
It was more than just an exterior. My dad would be incapable of doing what you and I are doing right now. Talking, having a podcast. Dude, no. It went more than just the exterior. It was he said little. You didn't know what he was thinking. He always looked angry. He always looked, I don't know. I'd have to show you some pictures sometime. But anyway, yeah, you get to that certain point in your maturity where you're naturally supposed to, come into your own sexually, or you're trying to figure out just who you are in general.
And, you're supposed to have a healthy male and female role model there to nurture you through those times, to develop into a healthy human being,
But can you imagine getting to that point where you're supposed to be at naturally, and then there was already somebody that threw a wrench into the works years before, right? They already started fucking messing up the blueprints early. Yeah. And so I like to think that's maybe where my father's toxic masculinity, I don't want to throw around that term too much. Obviously, it's really hip these days, but my dad was a womanizer, right? He had this excessive nature with drugs, with alcohol, with whatever it was, but with women too. He cheated on my mom all the time. And I don't know if this is 100% everything, but like I said, all I can do is try and put myself in his shoes. Maybe if I was in the situation he was, where I had a fucked up development, and life's confusing as it is, figuring out who you are and where you belong. I can't imagine having that stuff going on. Now, maybe my dad was in a situation where he's like, I don't know how to say it. It's really tough, but can you imagine as a straight guy, and I'm not saying anything against straight, gay, or whatever. I'm just saying, let's say you are a straight guy, and your first sexual experience, you're trying to develop, who you are as a straight person naturally, and your first sexual experience was with a guy. Now, and I know the way my dad was. My dad used a lot of insensitivities. He was, a lot of derogatory terms, a lot of put downs. Everything was weak, 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 weak. Like, you're weak. You're a pussy. You're weak. You're weak. When he would be dishing out a beating, it was to toughen you up. That was his fallback. Like, what? No, what? And I think it was all compensating, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And I'm thinking, like, I'm a man, right? I'm tough. I'm a man, no feelings, whatever. I have to wash away those bad incidents from early on, right? Also, it's like, okay, maybe my first experiences were very unconventional. So maybe if I fuck enough chicks, I can wash away that one thing, right? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
exactly. I can just
prove to myself that I'm a real man and I'm not,
exactly. And
I'm not the product of being molested by one of my uncles in my family or something, because I'm sure that would make you question your sexuality,
Well, it doesn't define me or whatever. But it was overcompensating everywhere. It was just, like I said, the womanizing front, the cheating, the infidelity, and just everything, man. It's just, dude, I like to joke sometimes that I didn't even know my real name until I was probably 15. I always assumed it was dumbass or pussy or, expletive delete. It was just, everything was such a put down. And I realize now that, wow, all these things, all these names, and even some harsher names that I won't even talk about on this podcast, all these things he used to throw out could have easily been associated with somebody like my dad had people known what had happened to him, right? Mm-hmm. Like, let's say, you're being bullied or what, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I totally understand.
It's like, wait a second, we're fragile, yet you went through the situation where, you have every right to feel fragile. And, you might be throwing the F-bomb at me or, because I'm weak, the F, I'm not trying to, expletive deletes for gay people, right?
Dude, in the context of the conversation, it would make sense because I'm sure your dad probably called you a faggot at some point,
Well, he would joke. Yeah, he would use those things. But it usually came off as like weakness and man, like, dude, I can't even really detail it hardcore, but it just makes so much sense. Yeah. It was all these things you could tell that it was serious deflection. Mm-hmm. It's like, whoa.
I mean, dude, let me ask you this real quick. Do you think that your dad like ever had any instinct to know that he's just continuing the cycle of abuse, or could he just not help himself, or did he think he was doing you guys a favor by trying to make,
I think he made excuses. When he would beat, there was times where he would unleash and he'd lose his temper and he would literally chase me into a room and start, I knew the drill. I could almost see my dad I almost knew when he was going to snap to a point. Like, okay, I feel the signs. It's going to happen. All right, there it is. Now, operation, run into the room, get in the fetal position because he's going to go for the head.
Right.
So I almost knew the drill at a point. But anyway, in the midst of like a beating or his like outrage and his tirades, you'd have my mom, who was kind of like Olive Oil or something back in the day, or The Shining.
Right.
She was Wendy Torrance or whatever.
Right.
She, was crying and she was begging my dad to stop, but maybe wasn't exactly calling the cops. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's this weird in-between place. She was really in a tough situation.
Well, back in those days, man, and, you and I are close to the same age, but back in those days, you handle your family problems inside the bubble. And maybe you brought in an outside family member or friend to help, but you didn't go to the government, you didn't go to the state to intervene immediately. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think a lot of families, they dealt with their problems on their own, and it wasn't as easily accessible either to, I think most people want to protect their own anyway, even if it is an abusive, manipulative situation, because they don't want to deal with the stigma of, maybe being outed or having strangers be exposed to your sensitive problems and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So it makes sense that, just continued on or whatever.
But when he would have a situation like that, in the middle of one of his outrages or beatings, or maybe when it was over, I heard many times over the same old excuse. It was something to the effect of, look, they might not love me, but they will respect me. Like I'm toughening them up. I'm making them tough. I'm like, what? And I'm just thinking,
right.
What?
Well, that's what I was saying. Like, maybe your dad thought he was doing a good thing.
I don't think so.
You think it was lazy?
It was just, dude, it was just another mask to hide all his personal shit. It was another mask just that was contributing to his denial or him repressing his stuff. That was it. Because I didn't know much about him. Like I said, the one story I did know, because my mom did tell me this, she said that his adopted dad, he would say, I came home for school one day and for no reason at all, my dad, his stepdad, told me, you know what, for the next 3 weeks, I'm going to beat the fuck out of you when you get home. Just to toughen him up. Supposedly, that's what my dad said. Like, he said, there's no reason at all. He just announced it. He said, you know what? Starting tomorrow, I'm going to beat the fuck out of you every day. And he said, he's like, no shit. He was a man to his word. That guy fucking tore my hide and did whatever. And
can you imagine how terrifying that would be? I mean, I'm sure to a certain level, but I mean, it sounds like that's a whole nother degree of just total fear control,
I don't know, because I just think all that stuff was just another way for him to hide behind his personal shit, his baggage, right? Because I think when I saw him before he passed away, which he wasn't old before he passed away, I think he was 44. It's crazy. It's going to be a weird thing getting to the age my dad was when he died. Holy fuck.
Yeah.
But
it's funny you bring that up real quick. Just a side note, like, I'm 41. And to think about the person that my father was when he was 41, it's just, it blows my mind. We're so different. But yeah, I can understand that feeling. It ties into your sense of mortality in a way, but, I would say you're probably, on a way better track than he was at that point in his life. So,
dude, I'm 32 going on 33 at this point in my dad's life. He had 6 kids. Right.
Right.
All sorts of stuff going on and all sorts of stress. And
well, I mean, like, just a little side conversation real quick I want to have with you is because I think about this myself. I don't know if it's like a generational thing or because of the way the world is right now, but I mean, I don't have kids either. And it's not because I never wanted to. And I've never been married either. It's not because I haven't been wanting to get married. But do you ever feel like, maybe you're avoiding having a family because of all this, terrible, traumatic family stuff that happened, or the things that your father did when you were a kid? Like,
I don't want to say avoid is the word. I can definitely say that it's left an impression on me. Not avoid. Believe me, I am not my father. I would never do those things. And actually, I think I'd be an awesome dad. But it has made me really, really careful and think about it a lot, because my dad never did any thinking at all. He just kind of acted and then, never really took accountability for stuff and just kept doing it. And my dad started, he got married, he got pushed into marriage at a young age, 16.
God, that is young. That's just way too young.
That's what I'm saying, man. Everything was spinning out of control. My mom's parents were super conservative Christians, still are, wonderful people. But back then, they come from a certain school. They found out they did the deed as 16-year-olds, like a lot of 16-year-olds do. That's probably the average age people lose their virginity, and they're like, well, you guys have to get married.
So it was a kind of a shotgun wedding kind of situation.
Yeah, sort of. And who knows at the time, and maybe at the time, my parents didn't fight it very much. I don't know, but they're kids. That you need adults there to tell you that that's a bad idea when you're a kid. Teenagers want to do dumb shit all the time. But all I know is that they were pushing for it. Whether or not my parents were super hesitant at the time or they knew what they were getting themselves into at the time, I don't know. But it happened.
Which is so funny, though, dude, because, like, nowadays, if you had a kid that was 16 that got pregnant in high school, I don't think any parent would encourage the couple to get married, because that just seems like compounding the problem. It's like,
what's funny is my mom didn't get pregnant. They just had sex.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
No, I'm saying that's even worse, right? There was no baby even.
Okay. Sorry, I'm putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Sorry.
Well, that's how old school it is, right? There wasn't even a baby involved.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, oh, you guys did this? All right, you're getting married.
Okay. I just assumed because you have a big family that I thought maybe they got started early, but.
Well, so it happened. It started happening pretty much soon after that. So they got married, and then my parents dropped out of high school, that whole story. My dad dropped out, joined the Navy, right? And so the family just started coming immediately. Life started happening very fast for him. He never really got to enjoy the teenage years all the way. And so I think he just never really grew up, and he started acting out. He wasn't ready for that responsibility. He wasn't ready to be a dad. He was still dealing with all that emotional shit that I didn't even know existed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just it was like a ceiling coming down on him.
God, it's crazy, dude. You don't know. There's so much that you have no clue about when you're 16. I mean, really. You're still a kid. You're a child, essentially.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's so funny, man. I love my grandparents, my mom's parents. I think they're just amazing people, and they're the best examples of people that walk the walk, right? They talk the talk and they walk it too. And they're amazing. And everybody should have the chance to change with time. So I don't think their practices would be the same today as they were in the 80s or the 70s. You know, my dad, my grandfather, my mom's father, he used to, for no reason, not for punishment, not for anything, his parents used to make him sit in a chair in the front lawn and read the Bible, read Psalms all day long for so many hours while his friends were playing in the sun. And then he had to come in at sundown when dinner time and recite certain passages. Right?
Yeah, that's brutal.
It was just a different place and time.
That sounds more like a 50s thing or something, you know?
Well, I mean, it's my grandfather.
Right.
Of course, it was back then.
Right, 40s, 50s, right.
Yeah. Well, my grandfather, he went, so that would have been the right era. My grandfather was in Vietnam. He was a pilot, but he trained the pilots. He actually didn't have to fight. He actually got to train the pilots. He kind of got off easy. But anyway, that's just a product of where he was raised and how he was raised. Anyway, so I don't think they would do those things today. So I don't want to be like, oh my gosh, you guys really failed them. I feel bad saying that. Mm-hmm. Because I just think it was a product of the time. But I really wish they didn't play their hand into like the whole marriage thing. But then again, if they didn't do that, I probably wouldn't be here today. Mm-hmm. But another thing too, you know, I don't know. There's a lot of pieces to it, and there's a lot of things you could say woulda, coulda, shoulda. This could have been different or whatever. But they're wonderful people. I'm not even trying to like bring that into it. But
well, I mean, all you can really do. I mean, you have to also understand that the world they were living in back then was completely different, and the people and the society was completely different. The expectations were not what they are now. I mean, we have so much more of a whimsical sort of society versus, you know, the more buttoned down 40s and 50s where, you know, if you were having sex or got pregnant at a young age, I mean, you were basically on the verge of being ostracized and shaming your family, you know? So, you know, they were just dealing with what, you know, had been the hand they were dealt at that time period. So, you know, I don't know, maybe it's not, you know, largely rare, you know, for a lot of people's grandparents who have had some similar experience to that, you know?
Yeah, as a product of the time. And they, like I said, I don't think they wouldn't do the same thing today. So it's just all very unfortunate. But anyway, that aside, it was just a snowball effect from there. Mm-hmm. And my dad, not only, like you mentioned, not only did he not have access to things like therapy and ways of coping with all the stuff that he was already probably dealing with at the time, but he just pretty much transitioned right into being a family and having to, you know, take care and provide for a family. He didn't even have any time to think of himself, let alone the people that he was supposed to be responsible for.
Oh, yeah.
It was just weird.
Dude, it totally blows my mind that there's people out there, you go to high school, they graduate, Maybe some go to college, but there's a large percentage of young Americans that just graduate high school and start a family and don't even think about, they don't think about what what that really means, what the responsibilities are. It's just kind of what you do, and they just go out and they figure it out as they go along, and that might be a successful model, but it's for some people, but for others, it's definitely I think a challenge. I mean, God, the burdens and the responsibilities of being married for one, and then automatically having a human being to raise and take care of when you don't really know anything, you have no life experience to fall back on. It's crazy, especially if let's say that, hypothetical couple had bad parents on both sides. It's like, well, they have no idea what they're doing. It's like the blind leading the blind, right? The horse before the cart or the cart before the horse. And it's a recipe for disaster. So I think you end up with a lot of people who are unfortunately damaged in some way,
Well, one of my biggest pet peeves in this world, it's when people don't take accountability. They fail to acknowledge that their actions have consequences, even if it's not with them directly. Maybe it, cascades onto other people. My dad would never take responsibility for things. So he was always blaming other people or events. So, for example, there was times where I heard in the midst of him being abusive or drunk and belligerent, I was the reason, right? I was the reason why he wasn't a doctor. My mom was the reason why he wasn't this. It was always somebody else's fault. No. What it is,
right.
My dad was really smart. He got great grades in high school. For all I know, he probably had a 4.0, but guess what? He dropped out, I think 2 weeks before graduation. And guess why that was? That wasn't because he didn't have he was married. He got married, but he dropped out to be a rebel because he was mad at the world. He dropped out to be rebellious, probably as a result of the marriage thing and all that stuff. So I'm the reason why he wasn't, my mom was the reason why he would, no. Just because you get something thrown into your lap doesn't mean, just you get a shit card doesn't mean you lose the fucking whole game. You just change the way you play.
Well, everything is a combination of your own personal self choices in life. And, you choose to go left instead of right or whatever. You can't blame the innocent for how you've chosen to conduct your life over the course of however many years, I mean, you should have like a feeling of empathy for these people that you've brought into a world that you've created,
Well, another thing too, when I don't really know how it all works, so I don't want to speak out of school, but I guess he was excelling really well in his time in the Navy and the tests he was taking and his performance. Basically, he had what it took to really go the distance with that too, really. Because he was a force, man. He was a strong guy, and he was the kind of guy you want as like a Navy SEAL, let's say. He's a guy that'll kill people and not fucking think about it the next second. He really was. Like, man, well, this dog's already broken. He's perfect.
I think, maybe what you're saying, it was, in that sort of scenario, a man of commitment, like you probably would have followed through.
But like I said, you know what? I imagine certain areas of the military, they want to break in some dogs and make them a certain way, toughen them up. The work was already done.
Well,
I mean, it really was.
Yeah.
I don't know. But so case in point, though, he had what it took to go all the way with that. And he had an opportunity. But you know what? He got my mom pregnant with me, right? And that was my fault too. And he got himself kicked out.
Wait, how is that your fault?
Dude, you're telling me. I don't know. But I'm saying that's what I'm saying. Like, how is that my fault? Like, wait, this is not taking ownership. You could have still did that. You could have provided for both kids. Okay, great. He's like, I had to get myself kicked out of the military so I could provide for another mouth to feed. Like, wait, but this still all stems from you not using protection. Am I missing something? Like, what? The story of it all, right? He always blames something else or somebody else. And I'm like, no, this all goes back to you.
Like he didn't know in the moment of like when he was conceiving you or your brother or sister or whatever, that he was taking a risk and throwing his future away to do this in the Navy or whatever.
Or I don't know if they exhausted every option, or maybe there was also option that he could have stayed because my mom was living on the base with us.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I mean, speaking as a former Navy guy, I know that they highly encourage a family type situation. They take care of, I mean, they pay for everything for your family. You don't even have to pay your rent. Healthcare, all that's taken care of. They encourage families to be brought up in the Navy, in the military life. So, I mean, that excuse for him dropping out of his call to be a military man has nothing to do with his family life. It was an excuse.
It is all an excuse. Is all excuses
to get out.
All excuses for whatever reason. You know, I don't know if it was a confidence thing. You know, we know people that blow away opportunities because secretly deep down they don't think they're good enough, or who knows where it's coming from. But it was just self-destructive behavior. But fast forward to all that, all of it's done. My dad lived his life. My dad's passed away. Listen to the first episode of this series. You could see why he sort of paid his price 10 times over, right? He was broken down yet again and rebuilt, and he paid the ultimate price by my sister passing away and him having to deal with that, and I witnessed it all.
Yeah, that story about your sister was hardcore, man. That was,
and it makes you it makes me feel, and I believe me, I sympathize with my dad for the first time ever. I'm like, wow, that was the first step into like him being humanized. Like, whoa,
right,
whoa, this guy's not just some monster with no feelings. That he's a flesh and blood human being. But anyway, like I said, I always assumed, you know, the whole, you never walk in another man's shoes, you don't really know everything that's going on, yada yada yada. I always just gave him the benefit of the doubt that there's more to the story. There's a reason for all of it. I don't know what that is, but I just have to believe that there's a reason, because nobody comes out like that, right? We're just a product. We get molded. We're a product of our upbringing. And this is another thing I could go on for hours if I wanted to. I don't give a fuck who you are. I think all adults are responsible for all kids, right? Obviously there's lines there. You don't tell a parent how to raise their kid. You don't cross certain boundaries with somebody else's kid. But ultimately, it's our responsibility to be good examples, because you don't know who that youth is. You don't know what he goes home to. You don't know what kind of influences he has in his life. Hopefully he has good ones. But you know what? If a kid does not have a good influence, he's going to find an influence somewhere. And you don't want it to be a bad one. So you might as well be a positive influence. If everybody out there was very positive and a good role model for everybody, then that's going to lessen the likelihood that they're going to fall into a bad crowd or they're going to get into some bad stuff. So everybody is a product of something. And my dad didn't have much of a chance, is what it sounds like. And that's really awful. Well,
the thing that sometimes you have to remember is that the person that you maybe demonize as a bad person was once an innocent child.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, who started out with just the basics of being a human being, and along the way was poked and prodded into one path or another. And it's almost kind of sad. So you can almost feel sympathy for these people who have, you know, royally let us down in our life. But you also feel like a resentment towards them for not having the courage to make themselves better. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that I try to remember, even though I guess, you know, at this point in my life, I've written my father out of my life, because you know, the type of person that he is so incongruent with who I am as a person that it's just too, I don't need to be shaking the foundation of what I've built up at this point. Forgiveness is, you know, something I can do, I feel like, without having a relationship with my father. You know,
sometimes it's not for the best to have an actual relationship. You know?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Sometimes distance is hell. In the last years of my dad's life, our relationship was better because it was less, right? It was distant and it was tolerable. And like I said, it helped me being away from them and being on my own and being an adult. It helped me look on it from an outside perspective and sort of come to those, you know, places of forgiveness. Like, you know what? I just have to understand that, you know, like I said, I think it helped. So basically, I don't know. I feel for my dad. I really do. I think he got a raw deal, and like I said, I'm proud and happy that I was able to forgive him before knowing any of this stuff. I forgave him before my sister was born and got sick. So I'm happy it didn't take all that stuff for me to do that and come to those places. But it helps me, like I said, understand him a little bit more and humanize him a little bit more. And
right.
If I didn't forgive him before, I certainly do it tenfold now. And yeah, it's a shame, man, because you could all trace it back to something else. I wish his mom was better. I wish his mom made better choices. But every man or woman's responsible for their own actions. My dad, still responsible. But where do you draw the line? Is his uncle responsible who was mentally challenged? Yeah. Is his mom responsible for making the shitty decision to do that? And to be a horrible parent? Where does it go? I don't know. It break the cycle.
Mm-hmm. I often tell people in my life that are friends or family members who had the benefit of growing up with parents that were married, that, loved them and nurtured them to the best of their abilities, that were always there, that were a rock. And I just say to them is like, I just put my hand on their shoulder and I say, you have no idea how lucky you are to just have this, like no matter what you do in your life, like you hit the lottery. I mean, in terms of like, having good parents that looked out for your best interests, that kept your life normal in a way. I've always been really envious of people who, grew up in one house their whole life and can go home for the holidays to that one place where they grew up and go back to their old bedroom or whatever. Or, that might be a little, far reaching, but, it happens. Still, there's people out there who, had their shit together and raised a good kid. And I'm like, dude, your life, you have no idea. Yeah. You really have no idea how lucky. I mean, don't be an asshole to your parents because you really fucking hit the lotto here, Oh
man, I can relate. I was the new kid more often than I wasn't the new kid, moving around so much. But yeah, I mean,
that's another thing we have in common too, is I moved around a lot, and so it was like every 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, starting over someplace new. Oh. And
you had it good, man. That's plenty enough time to make friends. Dude, I was sometimes not even a year,
Yeah.
It's all over the place, getting bounced around to whoever it takes.
And that's difficult too, because like you never really form real bonds with people, because maybe you make a good friend, you get used to a situation, and you move again, and then you're starting all over from scratch. I mean, I'm a fucking pro at starting over. With nothing, because I've had to do it my whole life, and there's a part of me as I get older, I'm like rounding the corner into being middle age, where I just starting to crave like just consistency of the people in my life, where I live, and it influences my decisions now because I don't want to move again, start over again, and the upside to that is that I know a lot of people. And some of them are really good. Some of them are, whatever, just people I knew in my past. But I've never known that sort of healthy, consistent, normalized lifestyle. And it just made me who I am. And, I'm a very malleable person because of it. But you notice that people who come from families like that tend to be either they emulate what they came from and they're just sort of the cookie cutter, or the people who came from the lives that are always in turmoil and changing or whatever, they tend to be a little bit more adventurous, a little bit more able to seek something like a dream, do something crazy, break the norms, go out there and really explore things, because they're not afraid of it, because they've lived their whole life of change, And so I've just seen that trend. I've just seen people who grew up in a really normal family, great parents, married, and they do the cookie cutter thing.
Be comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, because it makes sense to them. It's what makes. But the people who always had that change and the experience of non-stability are more willing to go out into the world and take chances and risks and stuff. So I guess there is a silver lining, what I'm trying to say, but
I totally accept that different people have different, expectations, things that make them happy, et cetera, et cetera. So I understand that what makes me happy isn't going to make that guy happy. And I might not understand at all what makes that, like, so I know plenty of people that were raised in a small town and they go to school in that small town. They get a job in that small town. They go right into getting a mortgage and family right out of college in that same small town.
Exactly.
And they live 5 minutes from their parents' house in a small town.
Yes. And dude, and I'm like, look, I'm not judging at all. I mean, I think that's a beautiful thing if you're happy with it. You know?
Absolutely. So to me, that sounds like absolute misery. But I understand, that's probably totally good for them and they're happy. So, but anyway, to wrap it all up, I just want to also say, I should have prefaced at the beginning with this. This is really hard to talk about for one reason, because I didn't want it to come off like exploitation, because it is a situation like that too. It's really tough to talk about this stuff, and I don't want it to be like that. Actually, if anything, I want to sort of pay a little bit of homage to my dad, because I think it's good. I think he's a human being, and I want to be able to feel compassion for him. And I think anybody that listened to that first episode, I think he deserves a little bit more, compassion. You know what I mean? A little understanding. So I didn't want it to come off the wrong way. It's more or less kind of a tribute to somebody that had so much potential. And I think ultimately, like all of us was a good person. We start out as good people. That's who we are. Hopefully that's how we end. Yeah. And I like to think that our actions don't necessarily change that. I think it takes a lot. But anyway, can I go into my Jerry Springer final thought? I think I have to have a final thought. So the topic, New Year's resolution 2019. If there's anybody that is keeping you from hitting your next level, if there's something you're holding on to, whether it's bitterness, some sort of grudge, some sort of sadness, some sort of emptiness or void you fill with this or that, you gotta really get past it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's easy as just forget. I know it's easier said than done to say, oh, forget it or forgive someone. I think that is a little tough, and that's hard to ask. But I think it comes with something like this. Try and understand the other side a little bit. Yeah. I'm not saying it justifies what they did, but just maybe understand what caused that or where they're coming from. And that at the start of everything, they were a person too. They were a child like you. And they maybe didn't have the greatest support. So I think if you can do that, that's the first and ultimate step to forgiving them, getting over whatever hurdle you're going through, and moving on with your life, and hopefully a good 2019. And like Josh said, and I think we tried to get the point driven home earlier in the podcast, no matter what it is you're going through, we live in America. If you're listening in America, right? If you live in a good country, if that's America or wherever, if you live in a privileged nation, you can get over it. Like, it doesn't define where you're at right now. At the end of the day, life is tough, but it could always be so much worse. And there's always something horrible going on to somebody else on the other end. There's somebody looking up at that same sky as you are right now that's in absolute pain, torture. Oh, God. You know what I mean? Yeah. So sure. Count your blessings, 2019. It'll take you into a good 2020, I assure it. That's all I think we can say about that. Hopefully, we're going to be back. I'm going to be back with more of these. I'm going to make that my New Year's resolution. I'm going to try and stick by it, and I want to do more of these. I'd like to do them monthly. I want to be reasonable. I don't want to be ridiculous and think I can do them weekly, because we have the normal programs and things like that. But
can I throw out a suggestion for a show?
Yeah, of course.
I would really love to hear a show about bullying, because I was bullied really, really bad in grade school for about 5 or 6 years, and I know a lot about that, or I have feelings about that. Oh yeah, and that's also an ongoing topic, with men and women who are equally as nasty. Bullying is a really shitty thing that happens, but almost like intrinsically inherent in human nature or something. That would be an interesting topic to talk about sometime.
That is a good topic, and I think everybody can relate to that. Whether it be giving or receiving, right?
Yeah.
And that'd be interesting to talk to somebody that would be willing to admit that they were a bully back in.
Yeah, it would.
You know what I mean? Because we all grow up.
Absolutely.
It doesn't necessarily define who we are later on. But no, I definitely have a million stories about that too, man. I already said I was the new kid a lot. How hard do you think that was?
Yeah.
It is pretty tough.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I totally understand that. And also, you never know if that bully was the person who was molested or something,
Oh, I know I tell you what, we'll put that on reserve because I actually can talk a lot on the topic of that. I have a lot of experience there too, trust me. And there was one case in particular where that was exactly the situation, where he was a kid that really had a raw deal at home. So that is a good idea. So I think we should tackle that. And obviously, if you guys have any suggestions for topics, please feel free to comment. If you're listening on YouTube, comment there. Make sure you're subscribing to the Revival House and clicking the notification bell, and leave feedback, leave 5-star ratings. We're going to leave the links in the description on the YouTube to take you over to our Apple Podcast link, our Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher. We're pretty much everywhere. And of course, you can check out just this show if you want, or you can check out the Revival House feed where it has all of our programs that vary in subject matter, and let us know what you want to hear, because I think that will actually determine how often I can keep doing this as far as, the regularity of it. Feed me topics. That might help a lot, 100%. And I'm glad you actually brought up the bullying thing, because that could be a good one. Who knows? It might be the next one. Mm-hmm. But anyway, onward and upward. Happy 2019. Like I said, let's see it go into a happy 2020 and continue forth from there on. Bye-bye, puppets.